Out. Okay, perfect. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for this day, uh, uh, Ahmad Faraz Badr and Mohammad Zan. So about Ahmad Faraz, Ahmad Faraz is a graduate research assistant at the University of Wisconsin in the United States. And the idea about bringing him as a speaker was his really good score in GRE, which was 336 out of 340. And he really has good experience with also mentoring students with his skills in the background, how to prepare for GRE. And also we have a very young face, Mohammad Zan, who is incoming master's student at the University or Institute, Georgia Institute of Technology in the United States. And he also scored really good. So he scored 329 out of 340 in GRE. And with that brief introduction, I will not take much time before I allow Zan to start with his presentation, and he shares his experience and he tells you what's the best way to do the examination. So Zan, the stage is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sabah, with the invite. So hello, assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope everybody is having a good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where they are. So Ahmed Bhai and me would be taking us this small webinar on the GRE. So I'll just let me know if the slides are changing.
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just give an overview of what we would be covering. So I'll just briefly go over what the GRE is. And then we would answer a very important question that whether you should give the GRE or not. The GRE is an expensive exam and it requires quite a bit of preparation, which would vary from anything between 4 weeks to somewhere around 3 months, depending upon how much time you're giving to it or at which point of your preparation you are. And then we'll move on to how to prepare for the actual test. So it's divided into 3 parts, the quant section, which I would cover, and then I would hand it over to Ahmed Bhai, who would cover the analytical section and the verbal reasoning as well. Then he will move on to the practice test and give you a timeline and other resources as well. And then we will be open for questions. So answering the question, what is the GRE? The GRE stands for the Graduate Record Examination. And as the name suggests, it's usually meant as a package in the application package as a standardized test for the universities, foreign universities, especially the USA. So that you could, they have a form of reference of the different students that are coming in. Before the COVID pandemic, the importance of GRE was a lot. So if you were applying for the US for any graduate program, be it a master's or a PhD, you would generally have to submit a GRE score. But after the pandemic, its importance has become somewhat diluted. It's not that it's not important anymore, it still is, but the requirements have become a lot more flexible. So the GRE is quite a bit long exam. It clocks around 3 hours, 45 minutes, and you have a break in between, so it could last to around 4 hours. So it actually consists of 3 parts. The first part being the analytical writing assessment, which has 2 essays. So the first, both the essays, you have 30 minutes of time to write them. It's not a creative writing. It's basically critical thinking. You have to have a logical analysis towards apartment, and this would be covered by Ahmed Bhai. And then the second part is the verbal reasoning. So it consists of 2 sections, each of 30 minutes. And these bullet points actually tell you the different types of questions which comes. And then we have the third part, the quant section or the mathematics sections, we can call it. It also consists of 2 sections. But this time you have 5 minutes extra, so you have 35 minutes for each section. And these are the topics which are generally covered in these questions. One thing to keep in mind is there is one unscored experimental section. So it could either be the verbal reasoning or it could be the quant section. We don't know. It generally depends on the test, on the person. But an important thing is it's unscored. So this section wouldn't count to your main score. But the thing is, you don't know whether it's unscored or not. So they don't tell you. So you have to attempt each section as if it's a score section. One more thing to keep in mind is the GRE is an adaptive test. So if, for example, in the first section of a verbal reasoning, you did very well, then it's very possible that the second section is going to be a bit more difficult. So it does not mean that you shouldn't do well in your first section so that you will get an easier section, because another thing to keep in mind is that GRE has a scaled scoring system. So if you get more difficult questions so that they maintain a uniformity, you will score a bit more. The weight of the questions are a bit more. So they do it through statistics. So they have this analysis, and it's mentioned on their website exactly how they do it. But basically, it depends on, they calculate how the difficulty of their questions through an algorithm, and then they assign each marks. Just to give you an example, I scored, I should have my raw score, which is the number of questions which I actually scored correct versus the number of scores I attempted, should have been 167 in my quant section. But my scale score was a 166. And in my verbal section, I should have scored a 160 on my raw score, but my scale score was a 163. So this would have meant that the verbal section was a bit more difficult, while the quant section would have been easier. Because the test is so long, ETS has now planned to implement a newer form of the test from 22nd September of 2023, which would be a lot shorter. It would be half of the current time. It would be less than 2 hours. And so what they're doing is they are not changing the syllabus. They're not changing the type of questions, but they're just removing different sections. So you now only have one essay to write. You have fewer sections on the verbal reasoning, fewer sections on the quant, and you have no experimental section. So that's quite good. But so people should prefer the shorter, the first instinct should say that you should give the newer form of the test. But actually went through different posts on LinkedIn, on Reddit, and on the actual website of ETS. And, it's not that black and white. So there are caveats to the new syllabus, the new format as well. So the first problem is it's a bit late. It's on 22nd September 2023. And it's for the people who are well versed with how the application cycle is, some universities tend to open their applications a lot quicker. So they have these early application dates. University of Pennsylvania, as an example, Carnegie Mellon does it as well. So you don't have a lot of time between sending your scores and actually giving the test, because it takes around 8 to 10 days for your scores to come, and then you need some number of days for you to send the scores to the university. So you should at least take a buffer of 20-25 days to your deadline, from your deadline to the time you give the test. And some people actually also want to give the TOEFL after the GRE because it's a bit similar, so it helps in the TOEFL preparation. So that's one thing. The second problem might be that because the old pattern has been there for a long while, so we have a lot of resources for that. We have a lot of practice tests for that. That's not the same with the new pattern. So if you want to actually practice for the newer one, you would have to give the old test and then change your strategy depending upon that. The third problem is, and this is what I found from ETS websites itself, was they said that because the older GRE had a lot more questions, so if you made a mistake, the weight of that mistake would reflect less on your score. But because in the new one, you have a lot less questions, so if you make a mistake, it would carry a lot more weight to your score. So basically what they're saying is the old GRE has a bit more room for errors, right? But then again, the advantage is it's only 2 hours, so you won't get fatigued. You would be able to stay focused. So now moving on to a very important question is that whether you should take the GRE or not. As I have said that it's an expensive exam. It requires preparation, and most of the people would be in their third year or, preparing for the final year. So, and they would have a lot more application material to take care of. GRE is only one part of it. So you would have to ask yourself whether this amount of efforts is actually worth it or not. So, one thing is you could ask different people what you could do about it, and you could take their advice. But what I've tried to do is make it as objective as possible. So the answer to this question is really depending on one thing. It's, it depends on your university selection, right? So university selection is a very important thing for the GRE. So to do this, I've created a small flow chart on how you can categorize your university accordingly. So Now, what the universities are doing is you can classify the requirement of GRE into mainly three steps, three categories. Sorry. So either the universities require it, which means that if you don't give the GRE, you can't submit your application to the university. They won't consider it. The second is they don't require it, they don't consider it, right? So it's useless to give the test, because even if you submit it, even if they might accept it, they're not going to consider it in your application. The third is optional, which is a bit of a mid zone. But the thing with optional is you have further two categories. So first category, it's in optional, the university writes it's recommended, which basically means that you should give the test. It's their way of writing that you should give the test, because the people with GRE scores would have a higher priority. The second one is that they generally say that, okay, it's fine if you give it, we'll consider it, and it's also fine if you don't. Okay, we will take a holistic view of your application. In the yes factor as well, you have two scores. It's not as black and white as the optional one, but it's you can use different websites to see this. Is the first category, it's GRE is a major factor for the selection, and some universities you would see that the score is sort of a boundary there. Certain, if a person is scoring less than that boundary, then they don't get selected, and if they are scoring somewhere above this, then they would get selected. So this is true for university like UCSD or something like that, which depends heavily on GRE. But the second one is they do require it, but they do look at their application as a whole. So you would see someone with a 330 getting into that university, but you also see someone with a 315 or a 310 getting into that university as well. So now the important question is, how are you going to know your university lies in which category? So I've created a small slide. I've taken screenshots from different universities, which will give you an example of how these universities phrase this. So this is an information which you will find in the application requirements of your program. So remember one thing also, that it's not university dependent but program dependent. The different programs of the same universities could have different requirements. So this is from Georgia Tech, and as you can see, what they're writing is the scores are not expected, but if you give them, they will be considered. So basically, they are categorized into this category here. And you could see from UCSD, they write, okay, it's not required, but we recommend that you do it. And UIUC writes that it's required. UT Austin say it's not important. So maybe you can take a screenshot of this slide so you could know how they are phrasing this thing. And one thing to keep in mind also is that if you do not find it as clearly as written, or if you feel that the university have not clearly said that what's their take on the GRE, you could just mail them. You could just mail their grad admission office and just ask them what's the impact of GRE on your admission decision. And 9 out of 10 times, they are going to be really clear about it. They're just going to say that, it's very important for us, or it's not important, and then you can categorize it. So what I'll say is, just make a list of universities which you think you should apply to, depending on the different factors of how your profile is, or your location, or if the university gives funding. And then after creating this in an Excel sheet or in a table, just at the right hand side, write, okay, this requires GRE, this does not require GRE, and then you'll see a pattern in it. So if you are maybe applying to 10, 15 universities, and if you see that all of them are GRE is an optional, then you might skip it. You might want to skip it. But 7 out of 10 of your universities are actually wanting it, then you would have to give it. But then again, I wouldn't advise you to do your university selection just on the basis of the GRE, that I don't want to give the GRE, so I just apply for those universities which don't need it, because sometimes other aspects are important as well. For example, Penn State or university like that gives it's very easier to get funding, and they require GRE. So it wouldn't be wise to not consider those universities just because they're not taking the GRE. So it's really up to you what are your priorities, and then decide accordingly. So this list will help you in the fact that if unfortunately you do not do well, then you would still have a list of universities which do not require GRE. So you could just come back quickly and just see, okay, these universities universities I won't get selected in, and I should apply to these universities. The other advantage of taking the GRE are that it could help you balance your application, provided that your application is lagging in some place. So, for example, if you do not have a good internship experience, then maybe consider giving the GRE. If you do not have a good CPI, so GRE could actually elevate your profile accordingly. The second is, though it's predominantly used for the US countries like the US, but other countries like Canada, countries in Europe also consider the GRE and consider it quite strongly. So it kind of gives you an edge, because applications to these universities, people are not really giving the GRE because it's something US applicants give. So it gives you an edge over other applicants. And the third is, if you're emailing a professor for that I want to do research under you, I want to be a master's student under you for funding, or just have a contact, then in that email, if you just liked it at the end, I've already given the GRE and I've scored this much, then it gives a positive look to you, because it shows that you are actually going through with it. You have taken steps to prepare for the application process, and a good score also gives a good impression. So yeah. And so now I'll just go through the quant section, and then I will hand over the slide to Ahmed Bhai, who will go through the rest of the sections. So the quant section is easier for Indians, I would say, because we do cover all of the maths they are going to ask till 10th class. Some people say that GRE asks for topics that are in classes 11th and 12th, but I don't feel that's true. They only ask till the secondary level. So, but the problem with GRE maths is, despite it being easier, it's a bit tricky. So they actually trick you in two steps. The first step is they pose the question in a certain way in which they want you to understand it incorrectly, or skip something, so that you make a mistake in understanding the question and you make a mistake. Or the second is in that options. They might make some confusion in options. So you have to be really careful in understanding the question, and then seeing the options, that whether I'm choosing the correct one or not. So for the preparation aspect for the quant section, I wouldn't advise to go through videos or go through a app, stuff like Magoosh, or there are a lot of whichever application material you have decided to go for. I think especially for people who had taken maths in 11th and 12th, you can just directly go on to the questions. Before that, just take a formula sheet and see the formulas that would be taken, that are required in the GRE, and then you'll be good to go. So, and in certain topics, after practicing those questions, if you feel that maybe I need a little bit more help, then go to the video. So it's a bit opposite in this. And for those materials, I think the best material would be the 5-pound book. So it's a quite a big book. It's a thick book, and as the name suggests, it's 5 pounds. So it has a lot of practice question. And one good thing about it is the difficulty of the question is slightly higher than the official GRE questions. So it actually helps you, to time the test easily, because if you're able to solve a little bit more difficult question in that time frame, if you get used to that, then the actual quant section become a little bit easier. Once you have solved this, I think you should, before giving the exam, go to these 2 books. These are from ETS itself, the guys who make the exams. And then you have 2 books, the official quant reasoning books and the official guide to the GRE. But and this is good for practice. But if you've gone through this whole book, then I don't think you would actually need to go here. You will be able to solve every question of these books. One thing to keep in mind more is something which I felt a little bit, and something which other friends of mine which gave the paper also felt, was the quant section was a bit more difficult than we expected in certain areas. So in that sense, these advanced topics from GRE Prep Club and GMAT Club could help. But that might also be because the actual pressure of the test might get to you. So, but this is enough. So I think now I should give the, just one more thing. So So in the quant section, timing is very important, though the questions are a bit easy. Uh, because of the timing frame, you have to understand the question and choose the answer correctly. So always, at least for the quant section, practice in a time-bound manner. The second is you would need shortcuts. You shouldn't solve each question step by step. You should have practiced somewhat that you should see the question and apply that shortcut. So that's one important thing. And the third most important thing is you shouldn't be afraid to skip questions. It might look that you would be able to solve it, but sometimes the question is put in a certain way that it's meant to spend your time there. So you should just skip it and come back to it later on. So yeah, so now just invite Ahmed Bhai to continue the webinar further.
Okay, thank you, Zen, for the wonderful presentation. Hello and assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Ahmed Faraz, and I'll be going over some of the other sections of the GRE and some of the other details that you might need for your preparation. So first off, we'll start with the verbal preparation. If you can just move on ahead, we can see the different preparation materials that we can have for the verbal preparation. It's important to first look at the ETS official material that is available for the verbal section. Now, the ETS has the official general test prep guide. They also have their verbal reasoning prep guide. So those are the most important resources that you should look at when you're preparing for the verbal section. The Manhattan 5-Pound book is a very good book for preparing for the quantitative section because it has really great math questions. It has a lot of questions about that. But when it comes to the verbal section, I would say you should first prepare from the official ETS resources, because some of the questions that you might find in the verbal section from the Manhattan book are a bit complicated because they use a lot of complex vocabulary when in actual fact, the GRE in the verbal section at least tries to test you on your critical thinking and comprehension ability rather than just knowing words. However, words are still important, which will be something which we will see in the future. Some of the strategies that you can use for preparing for the verbal section are that you could, well, first of all, you could simplify sentences. So as you're reading a passage, you can try to reword those sentences in your own words, and that could help you understand the passage more clearly and help you answer the questions, because now you do understand a few of the things what the passage is about. Another strategy is that you should try to understand the purpose of specific words and sentences that an author uses in their passage. So sometimes you might find that an author is giving a lot of examples about something. Sometimes they're giving counterexamples, and these are serving to kind of illustrate what the main point of the author is. An author is never going to explicitly state what their main point is. They're going to give a lot of supporting examples and features, and they might state it somewhere, but it's your job to understand what that main point or main conclusion is that the author is trying to say. And understanding which sentence is helping to support which part of an author's argument or issue or whatever is very important. You should also try to look for some of these key words which are there in passages and sentences. Words like although, words like however. These type of words help signal shifts in the narrative of a passage or shifts in the topics that are there within one passage. And they can help you identify different parts of a passage and help you understand something more clearly. So it's very important to practice different type of strategies while you're preparing for the GRE in the verbal section. Many of these different strategies come from a very good resource which you can find online called GregMat. So I would encourage you to look that up as well. If you could just click ahead to see some of the tips for the verbal section. For preparing for the verbal section, we have we have a sort of time division that we should while actually practicing for verbal preparation questions. Much like the quant section, you should first start off practicing your strategies slowly, but once you actually start doing some of your practice tests, you can have a sort of time division. You can say that, okay, if the verbal section is going to be 30 or 35 minutes long, then I'm going to spend 15 minutes on the reading comprehension questions, 6 minutes on the sentence completion questions, or something like that. This was a sort of time division which I had used, and it was very useful for me. So it's very important to just answer questions, stick to a time limit which you have, and sometimes you might get stuck on a question, which is perfectly fine. Sometimes there are two options and you might feel that you're stuck between them. So you shouldn't spend too much time on something. You should just answer to the best of your ability and move on. So now we can move on ahead to the vocabulary and reading section. So some of the preparation tips, which you can see, if you could just click ahead, we can see that to prepare for the vocabulary section, it's important to practice and memorize some of these word lists that you can find for the GRE. There are many lists online. The one which I found most useful when I was preparing was the Magoosh GRE 1000 words flashcards app. They have a vocabulary builder app and flashcards app. It's pretty much the same thing, but it's just a list of 1000 words that you can expect to find on the GRE. And it's quite useful to memorize such a list. You can also memorize the words which you encounter while you're actually practicing for the GRE. So you can make a list of encountered words. There are many methods which you can use to actually memorize the words. So one method is to use mnemonics. You could use some sort of pattern, some sort of image you can associate with a word, and that can help you, memorize the word and help you recall it more effectively. Another strategy is to use word clusters. So just group all the words that mean the same thing or similar things into one cluster, and that's what a word cluster is. Now, when it comes to reading, reading is also important for your verbal preparation. It's important to read a wide variety of topics and resources, but it's important to stick to the GRE. So the GRE likes to use academic sort of writing pieces when asking you questions about reading or reading comprehension or writing or anything. So I find that newspapers and magazines like The Economist and the New York Times, these are great resources to practice your reading. And although not everyone might have access to The Economist or other newspapers, while I was preparing for the GRE, I too didn't have access to them. But what I found was that you can always look up old issues of The Economist online. So something which is maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So they have old issues which you can look to just practice your reading. And some of the issues that they discuss in those old 10-year-old articles still seem to be relevant today. So it might not be all that bad. There's also a very good website called Arts and Letters Daily. So that's also a really good resource for preparing your reading and practicing for that. And novels, I think, are usually not that helpful. So novels, although they are great for reading, it's quite fun, but the density of complex words and sentences and overall academic writing is a bit less in those novels. So stick to the articles. And just a few tips about preparing for your vocabulary and your reading. You should try to aim to practice around 20 words a day. So that helps you hit the 1000 word mark. And you should try to incorporate a wide variety of topics while you're reading. So you might have you might really like a particular sort of topic, but you should try to diversify your interests. So you should also be reading a bit of history, a bit of politics, a bit of science and technology, and that would be really helpful. Try to practice for around 2 hours in a week. And that was just something which I did. It can be up to you how much you want to practice for reading. And taking short notes while you're reading is also helpful. Now, if we move on to the next section, we can see that the next section is the analytical writing assessment. So in the GRE, as you see, the old version of the GRE, the one which is going on right now, it consists of two essays, the issue essay and the argument essay. Starting from September 22nd, they're going to get rid of the argument essay and they're going to only have one issue essay. But we're going to cover both of them regardless. So while you're preparing for an essay, there is a very straightforward and easy example template, which you can find on GregMat. They have a great YouTube video about it, and they have a lot of resources about that. So following a template is very important when you're writing these essays and actually practicing for them. In fact, all the topics that can actually be asked on an essay for the GRE can also be found on ETS's official website. So they have an official list of prompts that you can use to practice from. And it might be a coincidence that the actual prompt does show up in your GRE as well. You should try to practice writing for around 500 to 550 words in your actual essay. And practicing your typing can help with that. And overall, while I was preparing for the GRE, I had practiced around 7 to 10 essays for each the issue essay and the argument essay. So I would also recommend somewhere around that mark could be a helpful metric to prepare for the analytical writing. Some of the strategies which you can use is simply to follow the template and to start writing quickly. You already have the template in your mind, so you can start practicing and start writing your essay, and always practice in timed sessions. So we have a sort of essay time division over here, which I used while I was practicing my essays. So the template is pretty straightforward. You have an introduction at the start, a conclusion at the bottom, and 3 body paragraphs explaining 3 main points about whether it was the issue essay or the argument essay. And so spending about 5 minutes for each part is sort of like the right point. You'd obviously have to spend a bit of time reading the prompt, what the prompt is actually asking, but spending around 5 minutes is pretty good. There are some differences between the issue essay and the argument essay. In the issue essay, you're asked to commit to a position and then explain your position um, about a particular issue. So you could either strongly agree with an issue, you could either mostly agree with an issue, or you could strongly disagree or mostly disagree. So a position like mostly agree or mostly disagree is kind of like a safe bet to go on. You could spend 2 paragraphs explaining why you agree with an issue, and then 1 paragraph saying why you do also agree with the issue, but there are some counter examples, some exceptions which can overrule your mainly strong view about this issue. And so it's very important to read the prompt and what the prompt is actually asking you. In the argument essay, you are given a sort of argument and you're supposed to support it or find counterexamples against it or things like that, depending on what the prompt is. But in the argument essay, if there's anything that you want to take away from it, it's simply that whatever argument is presented, you should first identify what is the conclusion, what is the argument trying to say, what are the evidences and facts that are being presented in the prompt about this conclusion, and then any stated or unstated assumptions about that argument. Because jumping from the facts to the conclusion, there are some assumptions in between, and sometimes they don't state them. So simply identifying them quickly in that first 5 minutes where you're reading the prompt and about to write your intro, you can identify these things, and these are very helpful. So just to conclude about essays, it's important to have this time division and to pay close attention to the wording of the prompt and what the prompt is actually asking you. And finally, it's very important to get feedback about your essays from other people, because with other sections, you do have some sort of answer key to which you can compare your answers. But with essays, it's not so straightforward. And we here at SSG are really supportive of any essays. If you send them to us by email or anything, we can review them for you. So it's important to get essay feedback, because this is one area in which you can find it to be helpful, not only for the GRE itself, but later on in grad school when you're actually writing. Just working on your essays and your writing ability is useful in that regard as well. Now, if we move on to the next section, we have the section on practice tests. So practice tests are very important for the GRE, and you should take at least 7 practice tests. And you should take it from me that practice tests are the best indicator for your actual ability to perform in the GRE. So if you just click ahead, you can just see a nice overview of the different types of practice tests that are available for you. You should always try to take practice tests which are from an official ETS source. So ETS has a lot of official guides and a lot of resources online which you can use to just make a practice test out of and prepare for the GRE. So you have the official ETS guide, which has 2 practice tests. There used to be a paper-based GRE. You can take a practice test from that. ETS has 2 practice tests online. They're called Power Prep Online 1 and 2. You can take some of those. And you can also search up random tests online, but I would suggest to just stick to the ETS tests first and then look for these other tests. But you can also try to make random practice tests yourself as well. You can maybe borrow questions from one place, borrow some questions from another place, and then just make your own practice test. And that's really helpful actually, because it was helpful for me, because when I was preparing for the GRE, the more practice tests that I did, I remember taking around 7 or 8, and that was really helpful for me. I could see that scores do improve over time, and it gives you a good indicator of how much you actually score in the GRE as well. And I did find that the practice test scores and the actual score did line up quite well. And finally, a few tips. Just remember to practice in exact exam conditions. When you're practicing for using practice tests, try to keep an error log of what mistakes you made so you can improve upon them in the future. And making your own tests is also a nice way to prepare for the GRE. Now, if we move to the next section, we have a sort of preparation timeline. So I think this can help answer a few questions which many people have about how and when we should prepare for the GRE. Now, most applications have a deadline, at least in the US, of the 1st of December or 15th of December. So with that in mind, we have this sort of preparation timeline for the GRE. I would recommend preparing for about 2 months for the GRE. Remember, the GRE is not everything, is just one part of your application. So in the 2 months of July and August, you would be preparing for the GRE in the background. Initially, you'll take in the month of July, you'll have your initial preparation where you might want to take a diagnostic test, just a GRE practice test, just to see where you are and how well you can do on the questions right now without any practice. And then you would actually begin your practice by reviewing all the different types of strategies that you can use for the different sections on the GRE. You would also practice your essays, practice vocabulary, and a little bit of reading as well. When August rolls around, I would recommend maybe taking one official ETS practice test, maybe the Power Prep one, just to see where you are right now. And then you can continue practicing from the official ETS resources and any other preparation packages that you can get online and from other resources, and basically continue on with your practice. So this is something which is going on in the background while you also have other things, right? And at the start of September, maybe around the first week or second week of September, that's when I would recommend to just finish taking all your practice tests and taking taking your actual GRE. So if you are planning to take the old version of the GRE, the current version, it's before the 22nd of September. So that first or second week of September is the right point to take that exam. And finally, you would get your results in 10 or 15 days or however long it takes. So getting your results in October is like the perfect time, because now you have enough time to work on other things as well. You have one thing down and you can go on to prepare for the TOEFL or IELTS or any of these other exams in October. All right, and just moving on to the last section that we have a lot of other resources that which you can refer to while preparing for the GRE. So on the SSGSA official website, we have a great list of all the resources for the GRE that you might ever need. There are many resources out there, so please do check that out. On our SSGSA YouTube channel, we have previous GRE webinars that we have taken. So we had a GRE webinar last year, we had a one before that. And so you can take a look at those if you want for more details about the GRE and different perspectives from different people and at different times as well. And finally, there are a lot of preparation packages out there for preparing for the GRE. I found that GregMat is a really great preparation package, so you can take a look at that. It's a good resource to get a lot of extra questions and practice for preparing for the GRE. And finally, if you want help with your essays, we can help review your essays through SSGSA. You can always send us an email and we'll review your essays and try to give feedback on that. So we are always committed to helping you in that. And with that, we can just move on ahead to saying thank you so much for listening and joining in on this webinar. And we hope to answer any questions that you have. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Faraz, and also many thanks to Zan for joining this. So I will now let's say I will pause, or let's say stop the recording, because let's start the discussion. And what I will